Now we've seen how forms can be used to access the data, possibly not all of the data, certainly not all of the columns, in a pretty format. Now, as well as being able to use forms to view the data and edit the data, we can use our forms to actually enter data into the customers table, thus giving us a much more neater and presentable user interface. So if we take our FRM customers, we can see that that's a fairly neat form. If I want to use this form to add a new record, I come down to the little icon here on the navigation bar, which is to add a new record. Alternatively, I can go up to New at the top here. Clicking either will effectively take me to a blank form ready to receive some new data. Now, all I need to do is simply add my new information in, Guy Vaccaro. You'll notice that moving from one field to the next is the same as moving from one column to next in a table. We simply use the Tab key. Tab takes me down to the next one. Home, Tab. If I don't want to enter a value in a field, I simply tab through that field. Total purchase to date. Let's say I spent $5,000 with them. Date they first purchased. And notice that when you're using a date field in Access, unless you tell it otherwise, you will get a date picker. It makes life a lot easier for selecting dates than just simply typing. Amount status M, children 2. Now the whole time I'm entering a new record, I see the pencil mark just as I did when I'm editing a record. So this data is not actually committed to the table until I leave this record, which I can simply do by being at the last field as I am now and tabbing once more, which takes me into a brand new record. If I go back a step, I'll see that I'm entered Guy Vaccaro, home, 33 Main Street, Indianapolis. Now, if I open up the tabbed customers form and go to the last record, I find that I'm in there as well because it's the same data. So both these forms are looking at the same data. Now I can use this much shorter form to enter data as well, but I'm only being able to enter data into these 5 fields. So I can enter the first name, I could enter a middle name if I wanted, and a surname, an email address, and a telephone number. And just as before, when I was entering, the little pencil mark is in the margin there on the record selector, so I can see that I'm editing a record. And to finish entering, I just simply tab out of the last field. And you'll see that we then end up in the next record to enter a new record. If I now go to the FRM customers, which I have open, and go to the very last record, you'll see that it doesn't actually show Fred, who I've just added. The reason for that is because this form is open, on opening it will bring the data forward that it sees in the table, but what it won't do is continually check to see if any new additions have been made. In order to do that, I would need to refresh. And on the home ribbon, there's an option here for refresh all. I can either choose refresh, which will only refresh this record, or refresh all, which will refresh the whole form. Refresh the whole form, then go to the last record, and I see I've got Fred Elliott, but only the first name and last name, because this form isn't showing me the email address and the telephone number. So I've got to be a little bit careful about which forms I use for data entry and which forms I use for viewing. As we progress through, you'll find that you can change the attributes of forms so that they cannot be used for data entry. Because this tab customers one is not really much use for data entry because it doesn't have access to all the fields. So we would create a separate form for data entry, making sure that everyone was entering all the correct data. And then potentially use these other forms for quickly accessing minimal amount of information. At the moment, all forms by default allow you to enter data into the table. So that's an attribute that we will need to change at some future point. Notice that if you move from one open form to another and changes have been made to the data behind any new records, then that data is not displayed immediately without a refresh option, which is here on the home ribbon. If, however, you make a change to existing data, so to an existing record, that is refreshed automatically. So if I were to change Fred Elliott to Freddie Elliott, as long as I leave this record, so that change is committed to the database, and then go look at FRM customers, I see that that says Freddie Elliott. So there is no need to refresh there when editing records. It's only when you add records and want to look at that record in another form that is already open. If the form is not open and you reopen it, then that will refresh the new records anyway. So that's adding data to your table via a form.